This episode is sponsored by Delete Me. Let's head back to the middle of a dark forest in New England, where a small, forgotten village has vanished from the map. And it would almost seem, in the modern times, that the powers that be are looking to conceal something. You see, this land is owned and protected from trespassers by a company called Dark Entry Forest Incorporated. This corporation has gone to extreme lengths over the past several decades to keep the public away from the area. In turn, that secrecy alone has fueled numerous speculations among locals. This is all despite the fact that the only thing remaining in the forest are the stone ruins of buildings that were laid centuries ago. So why is this corporation so keen on keeping people out, and is this forest really forsaken? Stay tuned to find out as we unveil the bizarre story of Dark Entry Forest. I'm your host, Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Our story starts in the early 1700s, a time when many people were moving to the continent, now known as North America. One of the most prominent regions for settlement was New England. You see, when the first wave of Europeans arrived in the early 1600s, they saw this rocky coast as a new frontier that resembled the familiar landscapes of home, which is why they christened it as New England. The Puritans and other English settlers brought with them not only their religious ideals, but also the seeds of European farming methods, tools, and governance. From fishing and timber cutting along the shores, to fur trade networks that stretched inland with native tribes, the area quickly became a hub of primitive commerce and cooperation. So, as towns expanded, they built churches, meeting houses, and crude homesteads. Hence, new towns in the area were being founded constantly, including Cornwall, Connecticut, located in what's now known as Litchfield County, the northwestern corner of the state. And it was there, in a little valley on the south side of Cornwall, that locals named a small patch of woods the Dark Entry Forest, a name said to be inspired by the shadow cast by the surrounding mountains, if not the fact that the land had once been a Native American burial site used by the Mohawk people. Anyhow, according to most accounts, in the 1740s, a man named Thomas Griffiths became the first to settle here. Some reports place his origins in Haddam, Connecticut, and suggest that by the early 1740s, he had acquired much of the property that would become a significant settlement, though ultimately he would not become the namesake of the actual town. You see, he was joined shortly after by Gideon Dudley, the first of many Dudleys who would come to the town. By 1753, Gideon's brother joined him, followed by Martin Dudley, who came from a different branch of the family. For context, and this is important, the Dudleys were an English family with roots tracing back to Edmund Dudley, a financial agent for King Henry VII. And this part of the story is pretty interesting, since after the king's death, Edmund, who at this point had risen to become a powerful financial agent for the throne, paid the ultimate price. Cutting to the chase, his job made him one of the most feared men in England, since he profited by levying harsh fines and extracting money from nobles on behalf of the king. So when Henry VII died, his enemies turned against him, accusing him of abusing his office and plotting without authority. For that reason, in 1510, he was imprisoned in the Tower of London and beheaded, a downfall that some would later weave into tales of a lasting family curse, a curse that haunted the family for generations. Now, whether or not the Dudleys were even really related to the king remains highly debated, but the legend remains. So with that in mind, families continued arriving to the area until the town reached its peak of 26 families. Life here was harsh. The winters were brutal. Infant mortality was high, and basic survival depended on relentless effort. Farming was essential, but Dudleytown soil was rocky, and much of the farmland was situated on a hilltop where water drained too quickly. For those reasons and more, the growing season was painfully short. But beyond that, the settlement was far from any reliable drinking water. So despite best efforts, the settlers were unable to harvest enough food from the soil. A few miners also came to the area for iron deposits, but that industry never really took hold. And so it was. Life there was basically unsustainable. The settlers were unable to grow enough food for their basic needs. In other words, daily life was precarious, and over the years, a reputation for misfortune began to cling to the valley. One story recalls Gershon Hollister, a man who died in an accident while helping build a neighbor's barn. Decades later, in 1804, General Herman Swift, once a colonel under George Washington during the Revolutionary War, also settled in the area with his wife Sarah. During a summer storm, she was struck and killed by lightning on the front porch of their home. This grief drew Swift into decline, and he passed not long thereafter. And what's my point? Well, tragic incidences like these happened beyond what most would consider a regular occurrence. And so, real-life events gave credence to the legend of the curse, giving the area a reputation that was set in stone. By the mid-1800s, with fertile land opening in the Midwest, many families abandoned Dudleytown. And by the early 1900s, the village was completely deserted, with the homes reduced to nothing but stone ruins. And although everything could be explained by the simple fact that the soil was poor and the harsh winters prevented good farming, the locals just would not let go of the idea that the ground was cursed. And with that being said, if we fast forward to 1924, these factors would become compounded. This is when the land was purchased by Dark Entry Forest Incorporated, a group of 41 shareholders, mostly locals. Their stated mission was to, quote, promote forestation, to run a wood mill, to conserve bird, animal, and wildflower life, and to afford a playground for the children and your children. They built cabins, ski trails, and even operated a summer camp that included horseback riding, all of which were amazing endeavors, though they would soon learn that even for leisure, this area was impossible to sustain. Curiously, not long after the corporation began their projects, misfortune returned once again. Accidents during construction, poor attendance at the camp, and financial catastrophes plagued the venture almost immediately. And it didn't take long before whispers emerged of the old curse that clung to the valley. And the list goes on and on. For example, they also began a massive reforestation campaign, planting 4,000 trees in 1924 and more than 10,000 by 1927. Most were gorgeous red pines that should have grown into an amazing forest, but in 1936, there was a pine moth infestation that devastated the new growth. Then, the following year, fires swept through, and in the decades that followed, more blazes continued to undo any little progress that was made. So by mid-century, the corporation abandoned its public efforts, shuttering the land and closing it off completely. And then, the next chapter would be one of total secrecy. You know, in a strange way, the story of Dark Entry Forest is a kind of real-world example of how far people will go to protect what's theirs. And sometimes, they build their walls so high that they actually end up drawing attention to the thing they were trying to hide. Allow me to explain. You see this card I'm holding? It had a rough life. Not because it expired, but because it had to be canceled after someone tried to use my data. How did they get it? Well, that's where things get shady. Companies known as data brokers collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, even social media, and then they sell it to the highest bidder, all legal and all without you knowing. And that's precisely what led me to try Delete Me, the sponsor of today's episode. Delete Me is a service that scans hundreds of online databases to find your personal information and delete it. But it doesn't just do that once. It keeps monitoring throughout the year to make sure that it doesn't show up again. When I got my first privacy report, I was shocked to see how many sites had my information, old addresses, phone numbers, and even family details. Fortunately, all of it was removed within days. The best part is that Delete Me doesn't outsource the work. They do it themselves. And if you need help with something specific, they've got real people to assist you. There's a reason Wirecutter named it the best data removal service this year. So if you want to start taking back control of your privacy, use my code SOCASH at joindeleteme.com/SOCASH and get 20% off your plan. Thanks to Delete Me for sponsoring this video and helping more people take back control of their data. But now, back to the story. By the mid-20th century, rumors spread that Dudleytown was cursed or haunted. Visitors exaggerated their accounts, reporting eerie silence at night, shadowy figures, strange animals, and an overwhelming sense of sadness. And I could also mention the tales of satanic rituals in the woods, but I think you get the point. But then things escalated in the 1970s when famed demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the site and declared it demonically possessed. Now, demonologists, in simple terms, present themselves as investigators of spiritual disturbances. They often mix Catholic traditions like exorcisms with more modern, theatrical styles of ghost hunting. But for the most part, the practice draws on centuries of Christian belief in demonic forces. And surprisingly, in the 20th century, this practice became a part of pop culture, thanks to figures like the Warrens. Now, for TV viewers at the time, the Warrens were not fringe figures, but they were nationally recognized personalities. They presented themselves as experts on hauntings, regularly speaking at universities, appearing in newspapers, and later becoming household names through television specials. Now, I do realize that this might sound a touch ridiculous, but they were taken seriously. They lectured at universities, wrote books, and their claims were showcased on programs that blended documentaries with paranormal drama. And this pop culture exposure gave them unusual authority that just fascinated the public, even though many historians and scientists remained very skeptical. Anyhow, that's just a really long way to say that their statement about the town being demonically possessed placed Dudleytown in mainstream pop culture in a way that it would never really escape. This centuries-old tale of a curse in the valley was now on the radar of thrill seekers and paranormal fans, and it just kept gaining momentum to the point that in 1993, Dan Aykroyd even called it, quote, the most haunted place on earth, a statement he gave in a Playboy interview apparently. Soon after that, Cornwall police found themselves dealing with waves of trespassers and vandals. Groups would sneak into the woods at night, spray paint ruins, break into decaying cabins, and occasionally light small bonfires to host makeshift rituals. By the mid-1990s, officers were responding so frequently that Dudleytown became a constant nuisance for local authorities, proving the point that folklore had spilled over into very real problems for the surrounding community. Dark Entry Forest, on the other hand, responded with no trespassing signs and aggressive enforcement. They were determined to keep unwanted visitors away. By this time, the corporation was functioning as a private woodland association, with members who owned cabins nearby, and they treated the valley as a quiet retreat. To protect that privacy, they went to extreme legal measures, and they also spoke directly to tour companies, asking them to remove their town from brochures, websites, and ghost hunting itineraries. Ironically, this attempt to erase the site from the paranormal circuit only drew more curiosity, a classic case of the Streisand effect. Though the most dramatic confrontation came in 2011, when 8 independent filmmakers were arrested for trespassing while shooting a horror movie titled Dudleytown Curse, The 49th Key. The crew had carried in lights, props, and cameras, intending to stage scenes among the ruins. Local police reported that the group ignored warning signs and strayed deep into restricted areas. All 8 were charged with first-degree criminal trespass and bared serious legal consequences. Now, the news of their arrest spread widely in local papers and online horror forums, and rather than discouraging interest, it amplified the site's notoriety. In our modern era, the Dark Entry Forest Corporation still owns and guards the land, maintaining close ties with local law enforcement. Yet the case remains that the secrecy they enforce has ironically continued to fuel the legend that they wish to suppress. By borrowing outsiders, Dark Entry Forest has made Dudleytown seem that much more interesting. And in that vacuum of access, the imagination has thrived. And finally, we need to acknowledge the fact that the truth is straightforward. Dudleytown failed for the same reason as many other colonial settlements: rocky soil, harsh winters, and isolation. Families moved on when better land became available, and the village disappeared. What sets Dudleytown apart is what came after. Instead of fading quietly, its ruins became a canvas for folklore, whispers of a curse, and sensational stories of hauntings. The moral here is hard to ignore. Secrecy breeds legend. The more aggressively people try to erase a place from the map, the faster its story spreads. Dudleytown was never really cursed until they tried to hide it. We'll leave it there for today, but I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned so you don't miss what we do next. Until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.